Welcome to Legacy of Throne. Before we begin this incredible journey through history, power, and forgotten empires, make sure to subscribe and turn on the bell icon so you never miss our next epic story. On this channel, we uncover the rise of kings, hidden dynasties, untold wars, and the secrets that shape the world. Subscribe now, because history belongs to those who remember it. Hey guys, tonight we drift back more than 2,000 years to the rugged hills and dry plains of ancient Macedon, where a palace boy named Alexander is just beginning the journey that will eventually rewrite the world's maps. The air smells of wood smoke and wet earth after a summer storm. The torches in the palace at Pelis sputter against the stone walls, and in one of the chambers, a baby cries, a baby destined to be remembered as the great. While you're settling in, tell me where you're listening from and what time it is in your corner of the world. I always love seeing the spread of places that join us for these late-night dives into history. Now, dim the lights, maybe let a fan hum in the background, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. The boy's official birthday is the 3rd of July 56 BCEE. Macedon is still considered a bit of a backwater by polished Greeks in Athens, but under King Philip II, it's rapidly becoming a military powerhouse. His father, Philip, is busy turning ragged militias into disciplined phalanxes and welding scattered tribes into one state. His mother, Olympus, is no ordinary queen. She's fiercely religious, sharp, tongued, and prone to fiery moods. Some ancient sources claim she practiced strange snake-handling rituals. Imagine bedtime stories that included not just fairy tales, but serpents slithering across the floorboards. Whether or not the snakes were real, Olympia certainly filled her son's ears with the idea that he was no ordinary mortal. She insisted he carried divine blood, descended through her line from Achilles himself. Imagine being tucked in with that story. Sweet dreams, honey. You're the heir of a demigod, so don't disappoint us. His birth was wrapped in omens. At least according to later storytellers. They said the same night Alexander was born, the temple of Artemis at Ephesus, one of the 7 wonders of the ancient world, burned down. To people of the time, this wasn't a coincidence, but a cosmic shift. One marvel falls, so that another, in human form, can rise. Historians still argue whether this tale was genuine folklore or later propaganda to paint his life as destined. Either way, it set the tone. From his first breaths, Alexander's life was treated as something out of myth. Life in the palace at Pella was less glamorous than you might imagine. The Macedonian court wasn't dripping in gold like Persia. It was rough, earthy, and loud. Soldiers with mud on their boots trumped across mosaic floors. Merchants bickered in the courtyards, and banquets smelled of roasted goat and onions. For a child, it was a mix of privilege and chaos. He had tutors, servants, and fine clothes, but also overheard drunken generals swearing allegiance one night and plotting betrayal the next. Alexander's earliest education wasn't just in scrolls and lyres. It was in watching the shifting faces of power, learning to listen between the lines of conversation. By the time he was 10, he had the eyes of a hawk for spotting lies. But Alexander was still a child. He squabbled with other boys, adored his hound, Peritas, and loved athletic games. Macedonian boys were taught early that strength and courage mattered. Hunting trips into the forests trained his reflexes. Riding taught balance and boldness. Imagine a gangly boy barely tall enough to mount his pony, gripping the reins while stable hands laughed, determined not to tumble into the dust. He learned to hurl spears at moving targets, chase wild boar through tangled brush, and ride until his thighs burned. For him, these weren't chores. They were rehearsals for the role his parents kept telling him he was born to play. One famous childhood story cemented his legend, the taming of Bucephalus. A powerful black horse was brought to court, but it thrashed and reared, throwing every rider. Philip declared it useless. Alexander, however, noticed something. The stallion was frightened by its own shadow. Turning the horse toward the sun, he calmed it, spoke gently, and then vaulted onto its back. Before long, he had galloping across the plain. The crowd gasped. Philip supposedly muttered, "My boy, you must find a kingdom large enough for your ambition. Macedon is too small for you." Was this story polished by court propagandists later? Almost certainly. But the symbolism mattered. The boy who could tame the untamable beast was also the one who could tame chaos itself. Historians still debate whether Bucephalus really was so wild or if the tale was exaggerated. But what's undeniable is that Bucephalus remained Alexander's companion into adulthood, carrying him through battles all the way to India. You could say this was less a story about a horse and more a parable about destiny. If Alexander could master one wild creature, he could master the world. His formal education soon expanded. At first, local tutors taught him reading, music, and the basics of Homer. But his father wanted the best and eventually brought in the philosopher Aristotle. Imagine being a teenager and having one of history's greatest thinkers as your personal tutor. That, however, belongs more to the next stage of his life. In his earliest years, Alexander's mind was already a cocktail of myth, ambition, and sharp observation. Olympias whispered that he was the new Achilles. Philip hammered into him the reality that power is seized, not gifted. The boy walked through palace halls where one day smelled of roasted lamb and laughter, the next of spilled wine and blood. Let's pause on the family dynamics because they mattered. Olympias and Philip did not exactly have a peaceful marriage. He was often away conquering neighbors and frequently took new wives or concubines. Olympia simmered with resentment, and Alexander often found himself caught between his father's booming authority and his mother's something intensity. It's said that Olympus cultivated in him a sense of loyalty to her alone, reminding him that Philip's throne might be his, but his true destiny was greater than Macedon. That kind of parental pressure could turn any child neurotic, but in Alexander's case, it forged ambition like iron in a furnace. Quirky tidbit. Ancient gossip claimed Olympias once told Alexander that Zeus himself had visited her, in the form of lightning, and that the boy was born from a union with the king of gods. Whether Alexander believed it fully or not, it stuck in his mind. Later in life, he demanded recognition as divine. Perhaps he was just playing the political game, but perhaps it was seeded in those childhood whispers from his mother. By the time Alexander was approaching adolescence, he was already developing a personality that frightened and fascinated those around him. He had a temper quick to flare if insulted, but also deep charisma. Friends said he had a piercing gaze that made you feel as though he saw through you. He idolized Homer's Iliad, keeping a copy by his side. Achilles wasn't just his hero. Achilles was his model. He wanted to live a short, glorious life, rather than a long, obscure one. That's a dramatic teenage philosophy, but in his case, he lived it out. Picture him at 12 or 13 in the training yard at Pella. Dust rising, wooden spears clashing, other boys panting from exertion. Alexander pushes harder, refusing to give up, even if it means scraped knees and bruises. He's not the largest or strongest, but he's relentless, demanding from himself the kind of excellence his parents demanded of him. When he loses, he sulks, but he studies his mistakes. When he wins, he expects it because in his mind, victory is his birthright. The palace environment added layers. Macedon wasn't like polished Athens. It was half court, half military camp. Banquets were loud affairs with Cathara music, boar meat, and gallons of wine. Generals argued loudly over strategy. Servants darted in with platters. Dogs fought over scraps under the table. Young Alexander watched, absorbing lessons about command, loyalty, and betrayal. He understood early that men's tongues loosened with drink, and that kingship wasn't just glory, but also suspicion, intrigue, and constant vigilance. And through it all, he remained aware of how others saw him. Some envied him as Philip's heir, others doubted his legitimacy. Olympus, being from Epirus, was a foreigner in some eyes, and that taint fell on her son. Alexander carried himself with a chip on his shoulder, determined to prove not just that he belonged, but that he was destined for something far greater than anyone else in the room. So, by the time the boy was ready for formal philosophical training, he already stood out. He was restless, ambitious, and steeped in both myth and reality. He had learned to ride like a warrior, to hunt like a prince, and to glare down servants who mocked him. He had mastered a horse others feared, and he had started to believe, half through his mother's urgings, half through his own pride, that he really was a descendant of gods. Historians still debate just how much of his later greatness was foreshadowed in these years. Some argue he was born with extraordinary charisma and leadership, others that he was simply molded by his parents' ambitions and Philip's military machine. The truth probably lies somewhere in between. But what's certain is that by the time Alexander turned 13, he wasn't just a boy in a palace. He was a storm forming on the horizon. The child of Macedon is ready to step into the next stage of life, one that will bring him under the guidance of a philosopher whose ideas would echo in his head even as he charged into set battlefields. But for now, the boy still lingers in the shadow of Pella, clutching his beloved copy of Homer, dreaming of Achilles, and whispering to Bucephalus that one day the world will know his name. Lessons from Aristotle. The boy who once wrestled with ponies and tamed Bucephalus is now stepping into adolescence, and Philip II decides his heir needs more than just spear drills and hunting trips. He needs a mind sharpened like a sword, and for that he summons Aristotle, the greatest philosopher of the age, to become Alexander's tutor. Imagine the teenage prince, dirt still on his sandals from chasing hounds through the Macedonian countryside, suddenly being told, "Pack up, kid. You're going to school with one of the sharpest brains in human history." That's like trading your local math teacher for Albert Einstein, except with a beard, a scroll library, and the ability to turn any question into a 10-hour lecture. Philip sets up the royal school at Myasa, a secluded sanctuary in the Macedonian countryside, shaded by vineyards and dotted with shrines. Here, Alexander joins other noble boys, future generals, and companions under Aristotle's instruction. The environment itself feels like something out of a painting. Olive trees rustling in the breeze, the air heavy with thyme and resin, young men sprawled on stone benches while a philosopher gestures with a stylus. It's less Hogwarts and more Socratic boot camp, but still the atmosphere is transformative. Alexander doesn't sit politely and take notes. He's restless, energetic, and often challenges his teacher. Aristotle teaches logic, ethics, medicine, natural sciences, and most importantly, philosophy. He introduces Alexander to Homer not just as poetry, but as a manual for living. Alexander, already obsessed with Achilles, copies lines, memorizes verses, and carries a dagger and annotated copy of the Iliad everywhere he goes. It's the ancient equivalent of carrying your favorite book under your pillow, except book tells you how to slaughter Trojans and win eternal glory. One mainstream historical fact is that Aristotle taught Alexander not only literature and philosophy, but also biology and medicine. It's recorded that Alexander showed unusual interest in healing, later personally prescribing remedies to wounded soldiers on campaign. Imagine the scene. A future conqueror who could also mix herbs and diagnose fevers. You wouldn't exactly expect your battlefield commander to say, "Hold on, let me check your pulse." Yet, Alexander did just that, a direct echo of his schooling at Myasa. Quirky tidbit. Aristotle supposedly lectured with a pet hermit crab nearby. Strange, but true. The philosopher had an obsession with cataloging animals. He dissected fish, studied bees, and classified shells. Some accounts suggest he showed his students everything from cuttlefish to chameleons. Picture Alexander destined to storm Persian palaces, crouching to examine a crab scuttling across Aristotle's table set. That's the odd mix of grandeur and geekiness that colored his youth. Historians still argue whether Alexander's later attempts to blend cultures, marrying Persian customs with Macedonian ones, came from Aristotle's teachings or from his own instincts. Aristotle emphasized Greek superiority, but also taught about the wider natural world. Some scholars claim Aristotle planted seeds of curiosity, encouraging Alexander to look beyond borders. Others argue Alexander later rebelled against Aristotle's prejudices. Either way, the influence of his tutor never entirely left him. In the schoolyard, Alexander was not alone. Other boys studied with him. Hephaestion, Ptolemy, Cassander, Lysimachus, all names that would later resurface as generals, kings, and power brokers in the empire. The bonds forged at Myasa were more than just classmates. They were lifelines. These boys hunted together, debated fiercely, and ate from the same bowls. Imagine a group of teenagers joking, sparring, and occasionally pranking one another. Except this group would later carve up the known world. Alexander himself grew especially close to Hephaestion, who became his lifelong companion and perhaps his truest friend. If Alexander was Achilles, Hestion was his petrel. The lessons weren't all dry lectures. Aristotle made them practice rhetoric, stand, and deliver a persuasive speech. Alexander loved this. He already had a voice that carried and a charisma that pulled eyes toward him. He practiced convincing others, a skill he'd later wield not just in front of soldiers, but in front of kings, queens, and whole cities. Aristotle also drilled into them the importance of observation. Don't just accept what you're told, test it. If a stream looks shallow, weigh in and check the depth yourself. That blend of skepticism and curiosity became part of Alexander's leadership, but there was also tension. Aristotle's philosophy carried the typical Greek disdain for barbarians. Greeks saw themselves as superior while others were lesser. Alexander, however, would later defy this by marrying foreign women, adopting Persian dress, and encouraging his soldiers to do the same. Historians debate whether this was a rejection of Aristotle's prejudice or simply political pragmatism. Still, the irony stands. The boy tutored in Greek supremacy would later attempt one of history's first experiments in multiculturalism. Daily life at Mia had a rhythm. Mornings began with recitations, afternoons with debate, evenings with walks in the gardens, where philosophy spilled into casual conversation. Imagine twilight settling in, cicadas buzzing, while Aristotle asks his pupils whether virtue is innate or learned. Alexander, never one to sit quietly, interrupts. What good is virtue if it doesn't win glory? That's the boy's mind at work, always pulling grand ideas back into the arena of ambition. Yet, even as Aristotle lectured on moderation, Alexander absorbed lessons selectively. For example, Aristotle praised balance, in life, the golden mean. Alexander, he preferred extremes. Why walk the middle road when you can sprint to the ends of the earth? It's as though he heard all things in moderation, and replied, "Sure, but only after I conquer Asia." One night, after lessons, Alexander and his companions may have lounged under the stars. With wine cups in hand, they might have pointed to constellations, reciting stories from Homer. In those moments, the line between myth and reality blurred. Alexander didn't just want to read about Achilles. He wanted to be Achilles. When he looked at Orion's belt, he saw not distant stars, but a path laid out for his own destiny. That's the dangerous thing about mixing philosophy and poetry. It can convince a boy that the universe itself is his stage. The prince's personality hardened during these years. He grew increasingly confident, sometimes arrogant in debates. He could slice through an argument with a sharp remark, but he also listened when it mattered. Friends, respected him. Some feared him. All knew he was different. Aristotle's stamp on him was clear. Alexander could quote philosophy one moment and argue tactics the next. He was being sculpted into something rare, both thinker and warrior. Imagine the atmosphere. Oil lamps flickering, scrolls rolled across benches, the smell of parchment and ink, Aristotle tracing diagrams of the natural world, Alexander fidgeting, impatient to apply knowledge in action. The boy absorbed ideas like a sponge, but always tested them against his own burning ambition. Philosophy was fuel, but conquest remained the fire. What's striking is how much this period reveals about the dual nature of Alexander, the dreamer who memorized Homer and the pragmatist who studied medicine, the philosopher's pupil who loved reason and the warrior who believed destiny trumped moderation. He was shaped in equal measure by Aristotle's words and by his own restless hunger for greatness. By the time Alexander left Myadza, he was longer just a boy. He was a young man armed with knowledge, friendship, and a sense of destiny sharpened by philosophy. He had learned how to argue, how to observe, how to persuade, and how to imagine a world beyond Macedon's borders. He was ready, when the time came, to put all of it into action. The lessons of Aristotle lingered, sometimes as guidance, sometimes as something to rebel against, but always as a voice in his head. And as Alexander stepped back into the wider world, Bucephalus pouring the earth at his side, he carried more than a spear. He carried a mind sharpened by one of history's greatest teachers. The restless storm of boyhood had matured into a young man convinced that the world was waiting for him. And the world, though it didn't yet realize it was about to be proven right. First taste of battle. The boy who once listened to Aristotle's patient lessons under the vineyards of Myadza is now a teenager, restless with energy, his mind sharp and his arms strong. Knowledge, was useful, sure, but Alexander was no bookworm. He wanted to prove himself in the way that truly mattered in Macedon on the battlefield, and as luck or destiny would have it, war was always near when Philip II was your father. The year is 338 BCE, and Philip is facing a coalition of Greek city-states who have had enough of Macedonian muscle. Athens and Thebes, two of the proudest polis, have rallied together against him, and the decisive clash will come at a place called Cheroneia in Boeotia. For Alexander, now about 18, this is no classroom exercise. This is the real thing. Shields, spears, and the risk of being trampled into dust beneath the feet of charging hoplites. Imagine the weight of that moment. You've been told your whole life that you are destined for greatness, and now you get your chance to prove it. With thousands of men watching, talk about pressure. The Macedonian army is a terrifying machine by this point. Philip has transformed it into a disciplined phalanx, long, set, spears bristling like porcupine quills, soldiers drilled to move as one. Alexander rides among them, not as a pampered prince, but as a cavalry commander. His unit, the companion cavalry, the elite horsemen of Macedon. Think of them as a blend between a tank division and a biker gang, except with more plumes and shouting. The battlefield at Chaeronea is dusty, sun-glaring, the shouts of men echoing off the hills. You can almost feel the heat radiating off bronze helmets. Philip takes command of the Macedonian right, while Alexander, still a teenager, leads the left wing. That's like letting your high school senior drive in the Indy 500. Was it risky? Absolutely. But Philip had faith, or at least a sense of theatrical timing, and Alexander, burning with youthful confidence, is ready to prove himself. When the clash begins, it's chaos. Shields slam, spears jab, horses rear, dust chokes the air. On the Turban side stands the Sacred Band, an elite unit of 3,000 men, sworn lovers fighting, set, shoulder to shoulder, feared across Greece. Facing them would be intimidating for seasoned veterans, let alone a teenager. Yet Alexander doesn't falter. At a critical moment, he drives his cavalry straight into their flank, breaking their line. It's a daring move, executed with precision, and it shatters the enemy's resistance. The Sacred Band is annihilated, their reputation broken. The young prince has just announced himself to the world. Mainstream historical fact. Most accounts agree that Alexander's decisive cavalry charge at Chaeron helped win the battle and secure Macedon's dominance over Greece. It was his first true military command, and he passed with flying colors. From that day forward, soldiers saw not just a prince, but a leader capable of sharing their risks. Quirky tidbit. Some later stories claimed Alexander went into the battle with his copy of Homer tucked inside his armor, because what better motivation to fight than a bit of poetry pressed against your ribs? Scholars doubt the literal truth of this, but it fits his personality perfectly, never separating action from myth. If you're going to stab your way into history, you might as well have Achilles whispering in your ear. Historians still argue whether Philip deliberately left the glory moment to his son, or whether Alexander truly outshone his father by his own brilliance. Some say Philip orchestrated the whole maneuver, letting Alexander take credit for moral's sake. Others insist Alexander showed genuine tactical genius even then. The debate captures the tension between father and son. Was Alexander already outgrowing Philip's shadow, or was Philip setting the stage for him? Either way, the boy returned from Chaeron with blood on his spear and honor in his name. For Alexander, the battle wasn't just about killing enemies. It was about proving loyalty to his men. He fought in the thick of it, charging where the risk was highest, making sure no one could accuse him of being a pampered prancing who stayed behind the lines. Soldiers noticed things like that. They saw him dusty, sweaty, shouting commands, risking his life. And in the language of war that spoke louder than any speech, the victory at Chaeronea had seismic consequences. The Greek city-states were crushed. Their independence effectively ended. Philip formed the League of Corinth, a federation of Greek states under Macedonian hegemony. For the first time, a united Greek world was at least theoretically possible, and though Philip was the architect, Alexander was the poster child, the youthful heir who had proved himself in blood. But not everything was triumph. The victory meant grief for the Greeks, and some remembered Alexander not as a noble youth, but as the boy who helped destroy their freedom. Perspective matters. To Macedonians, he was a rising star. To many Greeks, he was the face of conquest. Imagine being 18 and already a symbol of both glory and resentment. No pressure, right? Back at Pella, Alexander basked in the glow of military fame. But his relationship with his father grew more complicated. Philip was still the king, still the strategist, still the one with power. Yet now, Alexander had tasted battle and glory, and his ambition flared. For Olympus, it was proof her son was destined to eclipse Philip. For Philip, it was a reminder that his son's fire might one day burn him too. Family dinners probably weren't the most relaxed. One can picture the scene, Philip raising a cup at a banquet, boasting of Macedon's might. Alexander smirking just slightly as if to say, "Yes, father, but who led the charge that broke the sacred band?" Pride and rivalry mixed uneasily in the air. Macedon's court was never without tension, and now that tension had sharpened. Still, for Alexander personally, Cheroneia was transformative. He had gone from student to soldier, from boy to commander. He had felt the thud of hooves, the sting of sweat in his eyes, the rush of adrenaline as enemies scattered before him. No lesson in Aristotle's school could have given him that. He had lived the epic he admired. He was no longer just reading Achilles. He was becoming Achilles, and deep down, Alexander must have realized something. Once you've tasted that kind of glory, nothing else compares. Hunting trips, palace banquets, even philosophical debates. All of them felt tame compared to the pulse of battle. It was addictive, it was dangerous, and it would shape every decision he made from then on. The world might still see him as a prince. But inside, he already felt like a conqueror, and the path ahead, shadowed by his father's dominance, twisted with politics, and fueled by ambition, was only getting more treacherous. For the storm was gathering, and at its center stood a young man who now knew exactly how it felt to hold destiny in his hands. Death of Philip, rise of Alexander. The dust of Chiria has hardly settled before tension at home coils tighter. Alexander has proven himself in battle, but proving yourself on the field and surviving your father's court are two very different skills. Macedon's palace at Pella is a hive of ambition, and Philip II, brilliant, ruthless, and unpredictable, is still the king. Imagine the awkwardness. A teenager with battlefield glory under his belt, living under a father who both praises and fears being overshadowed. You could cut the atmosphere at royal banquets with a spear tip. Philip is riding higher than ever. His victory at Cheroneia has crowned him master of Greece. He now sets his eyes eastward toward Persia, the greatest empire of the age. For decades, Greek city-states had dreamed of avenging the Persian invasions of 480 BCE, when Xerxes' armies stormed Greece, when Leonidas fell at Thermopylae, and when Athens burned. Philip plans to lead a pan-Hellenic crusade across the Aegean to liberate Greek cities under Persian rule and to seize Persian wealth for himself. He's the man with the vision, the army, and the plan. Alexander, meanwhile, is the impatient heir, waiting for his chance to breathe without his father's shadow blotting out the sun. But Philip's triumphs are always laced with drama. He is not a model family man. He has married multiple wives, partly for politics, partly for pleasure. Olympias, Alexander's mother, is proud and fiery, and she doesn't take kindly to being displaced or disrespected. At one infamous wedding feast, Philip marries Cleopatra Eurydice, not the Egyptian queen you're thinking of, but a young Macedonian noblewoman. At the banquet, Cleopatra's uncle Attalus raises a toast, wishing for a legitimate Macedonian heir. That is a son from a true Macedonian wife, not from Olympus, who is from Epirus. Imagine being Olympus in that moment. Imagine being Alexander sitting there realizing your legitimacy has just been insulted in front of the entire court. Alexander's temper, always quick to ignite, explodes. He hurls a cup at Attalus. Insults are shouted, weapons almost drawn. Philip, drunk and enraged, actually lunges at Alexander with a sword, only to trip and fall. The scene is equal parts tragic and ridiculous. The mighty king sprawled on the floor, his sons spitting with fury, the banquet erupting in chaos. Look, Alexander is said to have sneered. Here is the man who plans to cross from Europe to Asia, and he cannot even cross from one couch to another without falling. Ouch. That's the kind of burn that gets remembered. Mainstream historical fact. After this quarrel, Alexander and Olympus left Macedon for a time, going into semi-exile in Epirus. It wasn't a permanent break. Philip couldn't discard his heir so easily, but it showed just how strained things had become in the royal family. Quirky tidbit. Some sources claim Olympias kept snakes in her bedchamber during this period. Unnerving guests who discovered them slithering under blankets. Whether literal or symbolic, it paints a vivid picture. The queen of Macedon, proud and vengeful, surrounded by serpents, like a living oracle. One almost imagines Alexander as a boy learning to sleep soundly, even with the occasional reptile brushing against his ankles. No wonder the man feared little later in life. Historians still argue whether Philip truly intended to sideline Alexander in favor of Cleopatra's potential children. Some say Philip remained pragmatic, knowing Alexander was already established as heir. Others believe Philip wanted a purer Macedonian dynasty. The debate underscores how fragile royal succession could be. Legitimacy wasn't just birthright. It was a weapon wielded and contested at every feast. The tension between father and son continued until fate intervened. In 336 BCE, Philip gathers Macedon's elite for a grand celebration at i.e. modern Vagina. The occasion, the marriage of his daughter, Cleopatra, not the same as the new wife. Yes, confusing. Kings, generals, and ambassadors throng the theatre. Torches blaze, garlands hang, set. Musicians play. Philip, flush with triumph, strides into the theatre in dazzling white robes, unarmed, proud. His guards are conspicuously absent, left behind to demonstrate trust in his people. It's a fatal mistake. Out of the crowd steps Pausanias, one of Philip's own bodyguards with a dagger concealed. He strikes swiftly, plunging the blade into the king. Philip collapses, blood staining his ceremonial robe. Gasps and screams ripple through the theatre. Pausanias flees only to be cut down by pursuing guards. Just like that, the great king is dead. The assassination shocks everyone. Was it personal revenge? Pausanias had a long, simmering grudge, supposedly humiliated by Attalus. Or was it a conspiracy? Some whisper Olympias had a hand in it. She certainly had motive, simmering hatred, and frankly a flair for dramatic vengeance. Others even point fingers at Alexander himself, though evidence is thin. Historians still argue fiercely. Was Philip felled by palace intrigue, by his wife's menations, by his son's ambition, or simply by a guard's wounded pride? The truth is murky, lost in the swirl of gossip and propaganda. What matters in that moment, though, is the aftermath. Philip is dead, and the throne stands vacant. Macedon could easily splinter in crisis armies without a leader. Rivals eyeing power, foreign enemies circling. Into this void steps Alexander, just 20 years old, his face set, his heart pounding. This is his moment. Terrifying and thrilling all at once. He wastes no time. Moving with ruthless speed, he secures the loyalty of the army, the real power in Macedon. Soldiers had seen him fight at Chyrenia. They knew he could lead. He is proclaimed king. Rivals are eliminated with chilling efficiency. Any cousins or pretenders unlucky enough to stand in his way are removed permanently. Alexander may be young, but he's no naive boy. He knows that wearing the crown means sleeping with daggers always near, and he acts accordingly. Olympias, of course, is delighted. Some say she went on a purge of her own, eliminating Cleopatra Eurydice and her child to secure her son's throne. The stories vary, but all agree. Macedon's palace in those days echoed with both coronation chants and screams behind closed doors. The transfer of power was not gentle, not elegant, it was brutal. That's monarchy for you. One day garlands, the next day daggers. Alexander takes the throne amid both celebration and suspicion. He is now king of Macedon, hegemon of Greece, commander of a restless army, inheritor of Philip's grand plan to invade Persia. He stands at the edge of greatness, but he also stands at the edge of danger. Many Greek cities think Philip's death is their chance to break free. Rebels stir in Thebes, Athens, and elsewhere. Foreign powers wait to see whether the boy king will falter. His throne is not yet secure. For Alexander, the moment is both exhilarating and terrifying. He has long dreamed of glory. But now, responsibility crashes down like a shield on his shoulders. He must prove not only that he can fight, but that he can rule. The crown weighs heavy, even on a head already swollen with ambition. Imagine him that night in his chambers. The torches burn low. Outside, soldiers chant his name. Inside, he sits with Bucephalus tethered nearby, stroking the horse's mane, whispering perhaps to himself. His father's ghost still lingers, brilliant, flawed, murdered in his prime. Alexander must feel both grief and relief, fear and fire. He knows what his mother always told him. Destiny waits, but destiny doesn't come freely. He will have to seize it, hold it, and never let go. Thus, in the span of days, Alexander transforms again from prince to heir to king. The boy who once squabbled in Aristotle's school now wears the diadem. The young cavalry commander at Chyrene now commands an empire in waiting. The son who once quarreled with his father now inherits his father's dream. The world is watching. Greece is restless. Persia is vast, and rich. Alexander is 20 years old, and already the fuse of his legend is burning. Crushing revolts in Greece, Alexander wears the crown now. But it doesn't sit quietly on his head. At just 20 years old, he is king of Macedon. But across Greece, city-states whisper, "Philip is dead. The boy cannot hold power. This is our chance." For them, The murder of Philip in 336 BCE is not just palace intrigue. It is opportunity. Old grudges resurface, rebellion simmers, and the Greek world waits to see whether Alexander is merely a child king ripe for toppling. Thebes, proud and warlike, is the first to stir. Athens hesitates, but many in the city remember old glories and dream of breaking free from Macedonian dominance. Other smaller states test their boundaries, refusing tribute, sharpening weapons. Alexander hasn't even warmed his throne cushion before the embers of revolt begin glowing. Imagine being 20, barely out of adolescence, and suddenly having to prove to every suspicious general, jealous cousin, and rebellious city that you are not to be trifled with. No pressure, right? But Alexander knows hesitation is death. He acts with astonishing speed. While rebels expect dithering, the young king rallies his army battle-hardened veterans who had marched with Philip. They know Alexander's skill at Chyrrhenia. They trust his leadership. With them at his back, he marches south into Greece, like a thunderstorm rolling across the plains. His message is clear. There is no pause. Macedon is still master. Mainstream historical fact. In 335 BCE, CE Alexander launched a lightning campaign through Greece, quelling rebellions and reaffirming Macedonian dominance. He moved so swiftly that city after city surrendered without much resistance. His reputation, sharpened in battle and reinforced by ruthless speed, became his greatest weapon. As he advances, envoys scurry from Athens, from Corinth, from other states, offering words of loyalty. Most of them realize quickly better to bend the knee than to face Macedonian spears. But thieves make a fateful mistake. Believing Alexander too young, too green, they gamble. They rise in full revolt, drive out the Macedonian garrison, and declare independence. Other Greeks watch nervously. If thieves succeed, the spell of Macedonian domination might shatter. If they fail, the consequences will be dire. Thebes is no minor village. It has a proud military tradition. The city that once humbled Sparta, the home of the sacred band, what remained of them after Chyrrhenia. Their walls are strong, their fighters fierce. And Alexander, he is still young enough to feel the sting of insult personally. This is no mere political problem. It's a test of his very right to rule. When news reaches Alexander, he doesn't hesitate. He marches on Thebes with terrifying speed, covering hundreds of miles in days. The Athenians cannot believe it. Rumor had him far away in Thrace. Yet suddenly, he is at their gates. It's as though he's appeared, out of nowhere. A phantom army conjured from the dust. Panic spreads in the city. Some want to negotiate, others to fight. Alexander offers them one chance: surrender and spare your city. They refuse. Perhaps they believe other Greeks will rally to their side. Perhaps they underestimate him. Either way, their gamble seals their fate. The siege begins. Macedonian siege engines rumble forward. Ladders scrape against walls. Arrows hiss through the air. The fight fiercely. Women and children hurling stones from rooftops. Defenders shouting defiance. But Alexander's army is relentless. He directs assaults with precision. His companion cavalry striking like a hammer against the defenders. Finally, the walls are breached. Macedonian soldiers pour into the city. The fighting devolves into slaughter in the narrow streets. And then comes one of the most infamous moments of Alexander's reign. To make an example, to terrify others from rebellion, he orders Thebes destroyed. The city is sacked, its buildings torn down, its people killed or sold into slavery. Ancient sources say 6,000 Thebans were slain, another 30,000 enslaved. The once proud city is reduced to rubble, its independence erased in a single brutal stroke. Quirky tidbit. According to some accounts, Alexander spared only two groups: the house of the poet Pindar, whose verses he admired, and the temples. Imagine that entire neighborhoods leveled, but one poet's descendants allowed to live because Alexander respected his art priorities. It's a strange detail, but it reveals how deeply literature and culture mattered to him, even amid carnage. Historians still argue whether the destruction of Thebes was Alexander's personal decision or urged by the League of Corinth, the federation of Greek states Philip had created. Some claim Alexander wanted to make an example. Others say the League demanded punishment for Theban treachery. Either way, the outcome was the same. Thebes ceased to exist as a power, and the rest of Greece trembled. The message worked. Athens, which had hesitated, quickly backed down, sending envoys to apologize. Corinth and other cities reaffirmed loyalty. Greece, stunned by the swiftness and severity of the response, fell silent. Alexander had secured his throne not with words, but with fire and blood. No one doubted now that he was his father's son, and perhaps even more dangerous. But let's not pretend this was an easy moment for Alexander. Imagine walking through the smoldering ruins, hearing the wails of enslaved families, smelling the acrid smoke of burned homes. Even for a hardened warrior, it must have been sobering. He was young, ambitious, and ruthless, but he was also human. Did he feel a pang of guilt, or did he see only necessity? Historians still argue whether Alexander regretted thieves, or whether he considered it simply the cost of power. For the Greeks, the destruction of thieves was a scar that lasted for generations. Poets lamented, citizens whispered. Parents told their children, "Do not rebel against Macedon, remember thieves." For Alexander, it was a defining moment. Proof that rebellion would be crushed without mercy. Proof that the boy king was not to be trifled with. The campaign ended with Greece subdued. Alexander was confirmed as leader of the League of Corinth, the federation that Philip had created. He was now the official commander of all Greece in the coming war against Persia. The irony was bitter. The same cities that dreamed of freedom now pledged soldiers and ships to his grand campaign. Macedon's dominance was secure, and Alexander's authority absolute. At 21, he had already crossed a line few rulers ever dared. He had not just won battles. He had destroyed a great city to cement his rule. That act, brutal as it was, ensured that when he marched eastward, his rear was secure. No city wanted to be the next thieves. Fear, as much as loyalty, bound Greece to him, and so Alexander stood on the cusp of his next great adventure. Behind him lay smoldering ruins, terrified obedience, and a Greece united by force. Ahead lay the vast Persian Empire stretching from the Aeon to the Indus, rich in gold, armies, and kings. He had secured his throne. Now he would test himself against the greatest power of his age. Imagine him that night standing outside his tent, the stars wheeling overhead. He had crushed rebellion, cowed the proudest cities of Greece, and secured his command. Yet rather than satisfaction, what he felt was restlessness. For Alexander, victory was never enough. Thieves was ashes. Greece was quiet, but his eyes were already turned eastward toward Asia, where the real glory waited, crossing into Asia. The smoke of thieves still lingers in memory, though Alexander has left its ruins behind. He is no longer just the king of Macedon, nor merely the commander of Greek troops. He is the undisputed leader of the League of Corinth. At 21, with Greece cowed into submission, his gaze finally fixes eastward across the Aegean Sea toward the vast Persian Empire. This, after all, was his father's dream. Philip had planned to invade Persia, to avenge past Greek humiliations, and to seize the wealth of Asia. Now, with Philip gone, the task falls to his son. Picture Alexander standing on the coast, the salt air in his lungs, staring at the hazy horizon where sea and sky blur. Behind him, Greece lies subdued, fearful after the obliteration of thieves. Ahead, across the water, stretches an empire that dwarfs his own in size, resources, and manpower. Persia is a giant, its kings controlling lands from modern-day Turkey to Egypt, from Babylon to India. Darius III sits on the throne commanding armies in the hundreds of thousands. Against him stands Alexander with barely 40,000 infantry and 5,000 cavalry. It's David versus Goliath. Except this David carries a copy of Homer in one hand and the legacy of his father in the other. Before marching, Alexander makes preparations. He secures Macedon's borders, appointing Antipa, a trusted general, as regent to govern while he campaigns abroad. He raises funds by borrowing heavily, even pawning royal treasures. His gamble is total. He leaves Macedon nearly broke, betting everything on conquest. If he fails, the kingdom collapses. If he succeeds, the world is his. High stakes, all in Alexander's style. When spring arrives in 334 BCE, the invasion begins. Ships ferry the Macedonian army across the narrow strait known as the Hellespont, the modern Dardanelles. The crossing is not just military, it is symbolic. For the Greeks, the Hellespont is legendary. Centuries earlier, Xerxes' Persian army had crossed it to invade Greece. Now, Alexander crosses in the opposite direction, claiming revenge. He halts on the Asian shore, leaps from his ship still in armor, and casts a spear into the soil. According to legend, he declares the land won by the spear. It's theatrical, bold, and Oho Alexander. Mainstream historical fact. Upon set landing, Alexander visited the ruins of Troy. He sacrificed at the tomb of Achilles, his personal hero. He took part in ceremonies as if he were communing with the spirit of his ancestor. In fact, he ran a race naked around the tomb, following ancient custom, and hung a garland on it. Hephaestion, his closest companion, honored Patroclus in the same way. The message was clear. Alexander was Achilles reborn, come to live out a new epic, quirky tidbit. Supposedly, he also borrowed Achilles' actual shield from a temple to use in battle. Whether this is literal truth or later embellishment, the idea is deliciously theatrical. The young king strapping on a relic from Homer's age, ready to fight Persians as though they were Trojans. Talk about cosplay at world historical scale. Historians still argue whether Alexander genuinely believed he was descended from Achilles, or whether he cynically used the myth to inspire his men. Some sources portray him as a true believer in divine lineage, others as a master of propaganda. Either way, his soldiers bought into it, and so did many of his enemies. If you want to be seen as invincible, being cast as Achilles is a good start. The first Persian response comes swiftly. Darius is still far away, but Sart traps provincial governors in Asia Minor, must troops to repel the invaders. At the river Granicus near the coast, Alexander faces his first major battle against Persian forces. The setting, a shallow river, banks steep and slippery, Persians arrayed on the far side, cavalry glittering in the sun. Some of Alexander's generals urge caution. Don't attack across a river, they warn. Wait until morning. Find a safer crossing. But Alexander, young and eager, rejects hesitation. He knows a bold strike will terrify the enemy and boost his own legend. He orders an immediate assault. Picture the scene. Macedonian cavalry plunging into the river, water churning, arrows hissing overhead. Alexander himself leads from the front, helmet flashing, plume bobbing, his horse Bucephalus splashing through the current. On the opposite bank, Persian horsemen brace for the charge, their armor gleaming. The collision is brutal. Spears shatter, swords flash, horses rear and scream. In the chaos, Alexander carves a path, personally striking down Persian nobles. At one point, he is nearly killed, saved only when a companion cuts down the foe who had raised a sword above him. The young king fights like a warrior of Homer, reckless but unstoppable. The result, a Macedonian victory. Persian forces scatter, leaving the field littered with bodies. Alexander captures enormous spoils, including the families of Persian nobles, whom he treats with calculated respect. The psychological impact is huge. The Persians, once seen as invincible, have been beaten by a 22-year-old at his very first battle in Asia. Word spreads quickly. The boy king is dangerous. After Granicus, Alexander begins his sweep through Asia Minor. Cities fall to him one by one. Some surrender voluntarily, hoping for mercy. Others resist and are punished. Sardis, a rich city, opens its gates. Others, like Hyrcanus, resist fiercely. Alexander shows both ruthlessness and pragmatism. Where loyalty is offered, he accepts. Where rebellion furs, he crushes. Already his style of rule is clear. Carrot and stick, generosity mixed with terror. Life on campaign is grueling. Soldiers march under scorching sun, eat barley bread and onions, drink brackish water. Yet morale stays high. Why? Because Alexander shares their hardships. He marches beside them, eats their rations, sleeps on the ground. He is not a distant king on a gilded throne. He is there in the mud, laughing, cursing, bleeding with them. It builds a bond deeper than discipline alone. When he asks them to march into fire, they do because he has already done it. In these months, Alexander also cultivates his image as liberator of Greek cities under Persian rule. He strides into temples, restores local democracies, and poses as champion of freedom. To the Greeks, he is avenger of Xerxes' invasion. To Persians, he is a dangerous invader. To his soldiers, he is the hero of a new epic. Image, propaganda, myth, they all swirl together in the young king's march across Asia Minor. Quirky tidbit. In one captured city, Alexander supposedly found a golden couch and insisted on using it. Not because he needed comfort, but because he wanted to dramatize that he had taken the very seat of Persian nobility. If you want to rule Asia, he joked, you must get used to their furniture. His men roared with laughter. The mix of swagger and humor only deepened their devotion. As he presses forward, the scale of his ambition becomes clear. Most would be satisfied with victories along the coast, perhaps securing tribute. Alexander is not. He wants the heart of Persia, the throne of Darius, the empire itself. His eyes are set far beyond Asia Minor, far beyond the Aeon. He is thinking already of Babylon, of Peloponnesus, of the edges of the known world. That restless drive, never stopping, never satisfied, is both his greatest strength and his greatest curse. By the end of 334 BCE, Alexander has carved a foothold in Asia. His army is blooded, but victorious. His reputation soaring, his enemies unnerved. He has crossed the sea, claimed the land by the spear, and defeated Persia's first defense. Yet greater challenges lie ahead. The Persian Empire is vast, its resources immense. Darius III has yet to meet him in person. The battles to come will test Alexander not just as warrior, but as strategist, diplomat, and leader of men on an epic scale. And so the young king, still only in his early 20s, strides deeper into Asia. Behind him, Greece remains subdued. Ahead, Persia stretches vast and glittering, waiting to be claimed or to crush him. Alexander does not doubt. Doubt for him is death. He has crossed into Asia, and he will not turn back. The boy who once tamed Bucephalus, who once sparred under Aristotle's gaze, who once charged into the sacred band at Chaeronea, now steps fully into the role of conqueror. The world's stage lies open before him, and he intends to play the starring role. The Battle of Issus. The summer heat of Asia Minor has given way to the chill winds of late autumn. But Alexander's momentum does not cool. With the victory at the Granicus behind him, he drives deeper into Persian territory, weaving through coastal cities, tightening his grip on Western Asia. His men are toughened. His name spreads like wildfire, and his confidence grows with each passing mile. Yet the true test, the moment where myth and reality will collide, still lies ahead. For Persia is stirring, and Darius III, the great king himself, finally prepares to face the upstart from Macedon. The Persian Empire is immense, its wealth staggering. Darius can summon armies far larger than anything Alexander commands. When the young king crossed into Asia, he brought perhaps 40,000 infantry and 5,000 cavalry. Against him now gathers a host many times that size. Estimates soar to over 100,000, though ancient writers, never shy of exaggeration, claimed even more. Picture it, a sea of men, spears bristling, banners snapping, war cries echoing across the plain. To most, the sight alone would have been enough to trigger retreat. But Alexander is not most commanders. For him, the greater the odds, the greater the glory. As autumn of 333 BCE deepens, the two forces move toward each other. Darius takes up position near the town of Issus, along the narrow coastal plain of southern Anatolia. Geography plays its part. Mountains hem the land to the east, the Mediterranean to the west. The battlefield is tight, leaving little room for maneuver. For Alexander, this is a gift. In open terrain, Darius's numbers could encircle and overwhelm him. Here, in the bottleneck of Issus, sheer numbers matter less. It's as though fate itself is leveling the playing field. Imagine the Macedonian camp the night before battle. Fires flicker, casting long shadows on weary faces. Soldiers chew their bread, sharpen their spears, murmur prayers. Some joke nervously, others fall silent. And in the center, Alexander himself walks among them, cloak drawn close, speaking softly. He is not perched on a throne. He is there, eye to eye, reminding them of past victories, promising them glory. He points to the stars overhead and tells them that Achilles himself once looked upon the same sky. He jokes that if the Persians are bringing so many men, it only makes their task easier, more for us to beat. The laughter ripples, easing fear. His genius is not just strategy, it is presence. Mainstream historical fact. The Battle of Issus in the 3rd of November 33 BCE was the first time Alexander faced Darius directly. Despite being heavily outnumbered, Alexander's tactical brilliance and the discipline of his phalanx secured a decisive victory. At dawn, the armies face one another across the Pinus River. The Persians, glittering in bright armor, stretch across the plain, cavalry masked on their left, Greek mercenaries in the center. At their heart sits Darius, elevated on a high chariot, surrounded by royal guards, his presence meant to awe. On the other side, Alexander arrays his men with cold precision. The Macedonian phalanx, with its sarissas pikes, twice the length of traditional Greek spears, anchors the center. On the right, Alexander himself leads the companion cavalry, the hammer that will smash through. The air is sharp with tension. Trumpets blare, drums beat, the ground trembles beneath marching feet. Then, with a shout, the Macedonians surge forward, phalanx advancing like a wall of steel. Spears bristle, shields lock, the line driving into the Persians. The clash is thunderous. Alexander doesn't linger behind. On, set. Bucephalus, he rides straight into the thick of the fighting, his cavalry sweeping against the Persian left. Water splashes as horses pound across the shallow river. Arrows hiss, men scream. Brona clings against iron. In the chaos, Alexander's helmet plume flashes like a beacon, his spear thrusting again and again. He is everywhere at once. General, warrior, symbol. Meanwhile, the Persian center presses hard, their Greek mercenaries slamming against the Macedonian phalanx. For a moment, the line buckles. The fighting is savage, the ground slick with mud and blood. Macedonian spearmen strain, teeth clenched, pushing against overwhelming force. Alexander glances over, sees the crisis, and makes his move. Leading his cavalry in a furious charge, he punches into the Persian flank, rolling their line like parchment in a fire. And then comes the moment that changes everything. Alexander drives directly toward Darius himself. His companions cut down guards. Chariots splinter under the set. Assault, and suddenly, the great king of Persia, ruler of millions, sees death galloping toward him. Fear seizes him. Darius turns his chariot and flees, abandoning his army. The sight is devastating. If the king himself is running, what hope remains? Panic spreads like wildfire. Persian soldiers throw down weapons, stumbling over one another in desperate retreat. The battle is won. The Macedonians pursue relentlessly, cutting down thousands. The field becomes a rout. Persian corpses strewn across the mud, but Alexander, ever theatrical, halts pursuit when he sees Darius's abandoned chariot. Inside lie Darius's mother, wife, and children, captured, terrified. They expect humiliation or death. Instead, Alexander treats them with respect, even reverence. He assures them they will not be harmed, that they will be honored as royalty. He even allows them to remain together, refusing to exploit them for propaganda. It's a calculated mercy, one that earns him admiration even from enemies. Set. Quirky tidbit. When Darius's mother accidentally mistook Hephaestion for Alexander, bowing low before him, Alexander reportedly laughed and said, "You were not wrong, mother. He too is Alexander." It's a small moment, but it reveals the depth of his bond with Hephaestion and his knack for turning awkwardness into charm. Historians still argue whether Darius's flight was cowardice or pragmatism. Some say he fled in shame, abandoning his men. Others argue that a king's duty was survival, not personal heroics, that by living he could raise another army. Either way, the optics were disastrous. To the Persians, their king's retreat looked like betrayal. To Alexander's men, it looked like divine confirmation. Their leader was unstoppable. The aftermath of Issus is staggering. Persian casualties are immense, Macedonian losses minimal. Alexander captures not only Darius's family, but also immense treasures, gold and supplies. The psychological blow to Persia is catastrophic. Across the empire, whispers spread. Perhaps the gods favor the Macedonian. Perhaps the great king is not so great after all. For Alexander, Issus is more than victory. It is validation. He has faced the full might of Persia and triumphed. He has stood within spear's reach of Darius and driven him from the field. He has transformed from ambitious upstart to genuine world conqueror. His soldiers cheer him, cities tremble before him, and poets will sing of Issus for centuries. That night, the Macedonian camp is jubilant. Fires blaze, wine flows, soldiers sing of their king. Alexander walks among them smiling, but his mind is already racing ahead. Issus is not the end. It is the beginning. Persia remains vast, its armies unbroken, its treasures immense. But now, for the first time, it seems conquerable. The young king, mud still on his boots, blood still on his spear, gazes eastward. He has defeated Darius once, and he will chase him again. For Alexander, the road only ever leads forward. Pharaoh of Egypt, the battlefield of Issus, is behind him, its mud still soaked with Persian blood. But Alexander doesn't stop to savor. Victory is sweet, yet the empire he faces is vast, and Darius still breathes. For Alexander, conquest is never about one battle. It is about momentum, and so instead of pursuing Darius immediately into the heart of Mesopotamia, he turns south toward the wealthy coastal lands that feed Persia's empire. His target is Egypt, Jewel of the Nile, land of pyramids, pharaohs, and gods. Why Egypt? Strategy, as always, dictates his path. The Persian fleet still controls the sea, threatening his supply lines. To cut the Persians off, Alexander must seize the coastal cities of Phoenicia, then Egypt. With those ports in his grasp, Persia's navy will wither. And Egypt itself is rich grain, gold, culture. Conquer Egypt. And not only does he strike at Persia's lifeline, he also wraps himself in the mantle of a god-king. A king who wants to rule the world needs more than spears. He needs symbols. And Egypt is overflowing with symbols. So in 332 BCE, Alexander marches south. The road is long, hot, and bitter, but his men, hardened by victory, trudge forward. Along the way, they encounter the great fortified cities of Phoenicia. Sidon surrenders quickly, sensing the winds of fate. But Tyre is another matter. A rich island city half a mile offshore, surrounded by towering walls. Tyre refuses to yield. The Tyrians mock Alexander, certain that no siege engines can reach them. Bad move. Alexander, stubborn as stone, orders a causeway built, stretching across the sea to the island. For 7 months, his men haul stones, timber, and rubble, inching closer while under constant attack. Imagine the sweat, the curses, the sheer grind building a bridge to a city that doesn't want you there. It's an engineering feat as much as a battle. Finally, Macedonian siege towers rumble forward across the causeway, battering the walls. After brutal fighting, Tyre falls. The punishment is savage. Thousands slaughtered, survivors sold into slavery. Alexander is merciless when defied, but also careful. He allows Tyre's temples to stand, dedicating offerings as if to say, I punish rebellion, but I respect the gods. Word spreads fast. Better to open your gates than test this man's patience. From there, Gaza falls after fierce resistance. Another bloody reminder of Alexander's relentlessness. The road to Egypt lies open. When Alexander enters Egypt in late 332 BCE, something remarkable happens. The Egyptians welcome him. To them, Persia has been an oppressive overlord for centuries. Persian kings treated Egypt like a conquered province, not a partner. Alexander, by contrast, strides in as liberator. Cities open their gates. Priests greet him with hymns. Crowds cheer. For once, there is no bloody siege, no smoldering ruins. Instead, Alexander basks in the warmth of adoration. You can almost picture him dust, streaked from campaign, riding into Memphis with flowers raining. From balconies, his soldiers grinning in disbelief. After months of resistance and bloodshed, Egypt feels like a reward. Mainstream historical fact. The Egyptians hailed Alexander as pharaoh, their god, king. He performed the rituals offering sacrifices to the gods and was crowned with the double crown of Upper and Lower Egypt. In their eyes, he was not a foreign invader, but the rightful ruler chosen by the divine order. Quirky tidbit. During the ceremonies, Alexander supposedly paused to personally handle a sacred bull, APIs, stroking it and leading it in sacrifice. Egyptians, shocked and delighted, took this as proof that he truly respected their traditions. Imagine the scene. Macedonian soldiers whispering, our king cuddling a bull. But for Egyptians, this was no joke. It was holy, a sign of legitimacy. Historians still argue whether Alexander genuinely embraced Egyptian religion or whether it was purely political theater. Some say he sincerely sought divine validation. Others argue he was simply pragmatic, adapting to local customs to secure loyalty. Whatever his inner beliefs, the outcome was the same. The Egyptians adored him. But Alexander does more than accept the crown. He leaves a mark that will endure millennia. He founds a city on the Mediterranean coast near the Nile Delta. He orders a new settlement laid out Alexandria. Designed with straight streets, harbors, and grand plans, Alexandria will become one of the greatest cities of antiquity, a hub of trade, learning, and culture. Standing on the shore, Alexander himself supposedly sketched the outline in flour, marking streets and walls. When birds swooped in to eat the flour, his men panicked. But Alexander declared it a good omen. The city would feed the world. He wasn't wrong. At this moment, Alexander could have paused, luxuriated in Egypt's riches. But rest is not in his nature. He decides to visit the Oracle of Ammon at Siwa, deep in the Libyan desert. Why? Because only there could he receive confirmation of his divine lineage. To be merely pharaoh wasn't enough. He wanted to be recognized as son of a god. So he and a small party trek across the scorching sands, days of blistering heat, water skins running low, men stumbling. At one point, lost in a sandstorm, guides despair. But Alexander insists they will find the way. Miraculously they do. Some say snakes slithered ahead to guide them, or that crows circled above. Tales, perhaps, but tales that fit the myth. At Siwa, the oracle greets him not as mortal, but as son of Aman, the Egyptian equivalent of Zeus. Alexander never reveals exactly what was whispered to him. But afterward, he behaves as though the gods themselves have confirmed his divinity. Whether he truly believed or simply used it for propaganda, one thing is clear. From this point on, Alexander carries himself not just as king, but as God's chosen. For his soldiers, this is a little awkward. They love him as a leader, but divine status, that's a stretch. Jokes surely circulate in camp. Next, he'll ask us to sacrifice goats in his honor. But Alexander never cares much for modesty. For him, to be divine is not vanity. It is destiny. Egypt changes Alexander. In Greece and Asia Minor, he was conqueror. In Egypt, he becomes something more legitimate, sacred, wrapped in symbols older than his own homeland. He walks among temples where hieroglyphs stretch back centuries, where pharaohs lie inside tombs in pyramids. He sees himself not as foreigner, but as heir. Imagine the shiver of pride. The boy from Pella, now Pharaoh of Egypt, standing in halls where gods were once worshipped, knowing his name will be carved in stone alongside theirs. And yet he does not linger. Egypt secured, Persia's fleet crippled. Alexander turns his gaze once more eastward. Darius has recovered, raising another massive army. The real showdown awaits. For Alexander, Egypt was both victory lap and stepping stone. He has tasted the adoration of being seen as divine, and it only fuels his hunger. At just 24, he has conquered Greece, Phoenicia, and Egypt. He has defeated Persia's armies twice, founded a city destined for greatness, and been crowned pharaoh. Most men would retire in triumph. Alexander is only getting started. Ahead lies the battle that will decide the fate of empires. Gorga, the showdown at Gamma. Alexander has worn the dugal crown of Egypt, heard a god call him son, and founded a city that will shine for centuries. Yet, for all the triumphs, he knows the real battle still lies ahead. Darius III, the great king of Persia, is not finished. After his humiliating flight at Issus, he has raised another army, this time larger, better prepared, determined to crush the Macedonian upstart once and for all. For Alexander, it is the perfect stage. One decisive clash will decide who rules the known world. The year is 331 BCE. The place, a wide plain near the village of Gola in modern-day Iraq. Unlike the narrow pass at Issus, which forced Persia's numbers into a bottleneck, Galgama is open, flat, and broad, perfect for Darius's vast host. Disastrous for Alexander's smaller force, at least in theory. The Persians even smooth the ground to make it easier for their chariots to charge. Imagine a field so carefully prepared, it looks like a racetrack, except instead of horses galloping for roses, they'll be charging to kill. Alexander's men number perhaps unfool Darius's forces. Ancient accounts say anywhere from 200,000 to 1,000,000. Modern historians laugh at the million, but still estimate well over 100,000 at least twice, maybe 3 times Alexander's numbers. Facing such odds, most generals would look for excuses to retreat. Alexander, of course, rubs his hands in anticipation. To him, greater numbers mean greater glory. The night before battle, the Macedonian camp is restless. Soldiers huddle around fires, some sharpening spears, others muttering prayers. In the distance, Persian campfires stretch to the horizon, a sea of flickering lights. It feels like the stars have descended to earth, except each spark represents an enemy ready to kill them. Some Macedonian veterans glance nervously, but Alexander strides confidently among them, cloak swinging, voice calm. He reminds them of the Granicus, of Issus, of Tyre and Gaza, of Egypt welcoming him as pharaoh. "We have faced odds before," he says, "and we have always prevailed. Tomorrow will be no different. The gods march with us." He laughs that Darius has brought so many men, it will only make finding him in the crowd easier. Nervous chuckles ripple through the ranks. That was Alexander's gift, turning dread into excitement, fear into fire. Mainstream historical fact. On the 1st of October, 331 BCE, Alexander faced Darius III at Gaugamela. Despite being outnumbered, his tactical genius and disciplined troops secured a decisive victory, effectively toppling the Persian Empire. At dawn, the army's array. The sight is staggering. Persian cavalry stretch across the field. Scythe chariots gleam in the sun. War elephants brought from India loom in the distance. Darius himself stands at the center in a high chariot, surrounded by the immortals, his royal guard, banners fluttering above him. It is a spectacle of imperial power meant to terrify before the first spear is even thrown. Alexander's army, by contrast, looks small, tight, and lean. The phalanx stands ready in the center, pikes bristling. On the right, Alexander leads the companion cavalry, his personal hammer. On the left, Parmenion, his trusted general, commands the Thelian horse. Their plan is simple, but risky. Hold the line against overwhelming numbers, then strike hard where the enemy least expects. The Persians advance first, chariots charging across the plain. Their wheels bristle with blades meant to mow men down like wheat. Horses scream, whips crack, the ground shakes, but the Macedonians are ready. At Alexander's order, they open their lines, letting the chariots pass, harmlessly through, then cut down the drivers from the sides. What was meant to be terror turns into chaos. The vaunted chariots meant to shred formations are reduced to wreckage in minutes. Next comes the cavalry clash. On the Macedonian left, Parmenion is pressed hard. Persian horsemen flood against him, threatening to outflank the flanks. Dust clouds rise, the sound of hooves thunder. For a moment, it seems the line might break, but Parmenion holds, stubborn and grim. Meanwhile, on the right, Alexander sees his chance. With a shout, he leads the companions in a wedge formation, spear pointed forward, charging directly at a gap in the Persian line. Imagine it, Alexander at the tip, Bucephalus charging, plume blazing. Companions tight behind the wedge, driving like an arrow into the enemy. They smash into the Persian cavalry, scattering them, and then angle inward straight toward Darius himself. The sight is terrifying. Once again, the great king watches as Alexander cuts through his guard closing in. Panic grips him. Despite his vast army, despite his carefully prepared battlefield, Darius loses his nerve. He turns his chariot and flees. Just as at Issus, the symbol of Persia's power vanishes in dust. His men, seeing their king run, begin to collapse. Some fight bravely, others throw down arms. Many are trampled in the stampede. Quirky tidbit. Some ancient accounts say Darius fled so fast he left his cloak, bow, and royal chariot behind, essentially his kingly, lost and found. Alexander later displayed them as trophies, proof that the so-called great king had fled like a common coward. Macedonian soldiers joked that Darius had donated his wardrobe. Historians still argue whether Darius's flight was cowardice or calculated survival. Was he genuinely terrified, or did he believe his duty was to live and raise another army? Modern scholars lean toward the latter, but in the eyes of his men, the effect was the same: disaster. Armies fight on confidence, and confidence shattered when their king bolted. The rout is immense. Tens of thousands of Persians die, while Macedonian losses are minimal. The battlefield is littered with broken spears, overturned chariots, and fallen banners. For Alexander, it is not just victory, it is empire. With Galama, Persia is effectively his. Babylon, Susa, Bucephalus, all will fall in quick succession. The great king has been broken, his empire ripe for the taking. That night, the Macedonian camp erupts in celebration. Soldiers cheer, feast, and boast of their deeds. Alexander accepts their praises, but remains restless. He knows the war isn't over. Darius has fled east, still alive, still a rival. But the symbolic power of Gala cannot be overstated. In one day, a young king from Macedon has defeated the largest empire the world had ever seen. And what of Alexander himself? He is transformed. No longer merely conqueror of Greece, liberator of Egypt, or clever tactician. Now he is master of Asia. He strides among his men, with the easy confidence of one who believes destiny bends to his will. His enemies see him as unstoppable, his allies as God-touched, his soldiers as the greatest leader alive. Imagine him standing alone on the battlefield after the noise dies down. The plains, stretching silent beneath the stars. Around him lie the remnants of Persia's might. In his heart burns the knowledge that he has achieved what even the heroes of myth never dreamed. Not just victory, but the keys to an empire spanning continents. The boy from Pella, the student of Aristotle, the taming prince of Bucephalus, now the conqueror of Persia. And yet for Alexander, this is not the end. This is never the end. For men like him, Glory is a fire that cannot be quenched. Ahead still lies Babylon, Bucephalus, and the chase after Darius. The world has opened before him, and he intends to claim it all. 10. The King of Kings. The dust of Galgum still clings to Alexander's boots, the smell of blood and churned earth not yet faded, set from his senses. And already the young conqueror looks ahead. Persia's armies have been broken on the plain. Its great king has fled once again, and the gates of empire swing open. Babylon, Susa, Bucephalus, the ancient heartlands of the Achaemenid dynasty lie waiting, and Alexander, now 25, walks toward them, not as invader, but as something far more intoxicating, as master. When the Macedonian army approaches Babylon, the fabled city of Mesopotamia, the outcome is not battle, but pageantry. The walls loom vast, painted and glazed with bright images of lions and dragons. Ziggurats rise into the hot sky, and the Ishtar Gate, tiled with blue lapis and golden beasts, glitters like something out of a dream. Instead of resistance, the Babylonians stream out in welcome. They are weary of Darius's weakness, eager for stability, willing to bow to the man who has crushed the great king. Alexander marches in at the head of his troops, flanked by companions still strewn with dust. Phalanx ranks set, gleaming, cavalry mounts snorting, drums echo, trumpets blare. And behind the spectacle lies the real message. Macedon is no longer just a kingdom on the edge of Greece. It is the power that holds the throat of Persia. Mainstream historical fact: Babylon, one of the greatest cities of the ancient world, opened its gates to Alexander in 331 BCE after Gala. He was received not as conqueror, but as legitimate ruler, a sign of just how fragile Persian loyalty to Darius had become. The city dazzles the Macedonians. Soldiers gape at gardens, markets overflowing with spices, perfumed courtyards. Some swear they found the hanging gardens themselves, though historians still debate whether those gardens ever existed here or elsewhere. Wine flows, entertainers perform, and Alexander stages sacrifices to Babylonian gods, eager to present himself not as foreign plunderer, but as rightful successor. Priests chant, incense curls into the air, and Alexander bows in ritual, half pragmatic politics set, half genuine fascination. Quirky tidbit: in Babylon, Alexander supposedly took an interest in the astronomical records kept by priests, clay tablets stretching back centuries, tracking stars and eclipses. Imagine a general who has just smashed the largest empire in the world, pausing to ask, "So, when's the next lunar eclipse?" He was hungry for knowledge as much as for conquest. From Babylon, the march continues to Susa, another jewel of the empire. Here, too, the gates open without resistance, and here Alexander strikes gold, literally. The royal treasury is captured with hundreds of tons of silver and gold, a staggering fortune. For an army perpetually half-starved of pay, this is paradise. Alexander distributes riches, rewards loyalty, and ensures his men see tangible proof of victory. Their young king is not leading them into ruin. He is leading them into wealth beyond imagining. But Bucephalus, the ceremonial capital of Persia, is different. Symbol of aid pride, seat of kings, set, repository of centuries of royal glory. Bucephalus does not surrender so easily. The Macedonian army fights its way through, finally storming the city in early 330 BCE. And here, Alexander's ruthlessness shows again. He allows his troops to plunder, palaces are stripped, treasures carried off, Persian nobles slain or enslaved. The Macedonians, long fed on stories of Xerxes burning Athens, see this as righteous vengeance. They burned our temples, they say, and now we burn theirs. And burn it, they do. One night, amid feasting and wine, flames leap skyward. Whether it was drunken impulse, deliberate revenge, or a cold act of political theater, Bucephalus is set ablaze. Columns topple, roofs collapse, carvings blacken, the ceremonial heart of Persia becomes ash. Ancient sources differ. Some say a courtesan Tai urged Alexander to burn the palace in revenge for Greece. Others say Alexander himself ordered it, then regretted it when sober. Historians still argue whether the destruction was an accident, a calculated symbol, or a hangover's mistake. Whatever the cause, the image is unforgettable. Alexander, torch in hand, watching an empire's glory go up in flames. Yet conquest is not only destruction. Alexander now assumes the title once borne by Darius and Xerxes, King of Kings. He begins adopting Persian customs, wearing their robes, sitting on their throne, holding court in their style. To Macedonians, this is shocking. Their rough and ready king suddenly in silk trousers bowing to Persian etiquette. Many grumble, mutter about betrayal of Greek values, but Alexander knows symbols matter. If he is to rule not just as conqueror, but as ruler, he must be more than Macedonian. He must be Persian too. Mainstream fact here. Alexander began practicing prokonesis, the Persian custom of bowing before the king. To Persians, it was normal. To Greeks, it was outrageous, reserved only for gods. His men resisted, some openly refusing to bow. Quirky tidbit. One story tells that when a Greek refused to bow, Alexander laughed it off, saying, "It's the thought that counts." Another time, though, when opposition mounted, he snapped that loyalty meant adapting. You can imagine the awkwardness. Hardened Macedonian veterans, who had marched with him since boyhood, now asked to grovel like courtiers. Not everyone was pleased. Historians still argue whether Alexander's adoption of Persian customs was sincere or calculated. Was he genuinely trying to merge cultures, or simply using ceremony to strengthen control? His marriages to Persian women later suggest he sought real fusion. Yet his Macedonian officers often seethed. The balance between Greek and Persian identity became a constant strain on his reign. But for Alexander himself, the transformation was intoxicating. He was no longer the boy of Pella, not even just the victor of Issus or Galama. He was heir to Cyrus, Darius, Xerxes, the king of kings. He sat in palaces built for god-kings, held audiences with nobles who once bowed only to Persian monarchs, and sent out decrees in languages spanning continents. His empire now stretched from the Aegean to the Persian Gulf. At 26, he had surpassed every Greek hero, every Persian monarch, every ambition his father had dreamed. Yet even in glory, Alexander remained restless. Sitting on a golden throne did not satisfy him. Wealth and titles were fuel, not destination. In the markets of Babylon, he heard tales of India, of elephants larger than houses, of strange rivers, of lands where the sun scorched hotter than any Greek had known. In Pipolis, he looked at maps, tracing rivers eastward, eyes glittering. King of kings was not enough. He wanted to be master of the ends of the earth. And so, even as Prospilus smolders, even as Sua's treasures are counted, Alexander begins planning his next campaign. Darius still lives, retreating into the east, gathering whatever loyalty he can. To leave him alive is to leave a rival. To Alexander, unfinished business like hunger. He will not stop until Darius is captured or killed. Imagine him at a feast, goblet of Persian wine in hand, generals sprawled around him. The hall still smells of smoke from Perpololis. He jokes, he laughs, he quotes Homer, but beneath the surface he is plotting. His gaze drifts east, always east. His companions may cheer their wealth, but Alexander is already thinking of deserts to cross, mountains to climb, rivers to ford, enemies to chase. For the boy who tamed Bucephalus, the prince who studied under Aristotle, the youth who shattered the sacred band, the conqueror who burned Persepolis, there can be no rest. He is king of kings now, but in his heart he knows one truth. Kingship is not a crown you wear. It is a fire you must feed. And Alexander's fire is far from burning out. Marching into India, the palaces of Perpololis are still smoldering memories. The treasures of Susa still glitter in the minds of Macedonian soldiers, and the title King of Kings now hangs around. Alexander's shoulders like a cloak, yet, even draped in wealth and ceremony, he cannot sit still. Eastward always calls. The maps spread before him show mountains, deserts, rivers, and beyond them, lands few Greeks have ever seen. Lands spoken of in half-myth, India. But before reaching the fabled subcontinent, Alexander must finish what he started. Darius III still lives. After Gale, the great king fled eastward, gathering what fragments of loyalty remained. Alexander pursues relentlessly, marching through Media, then into Parthia, across plateaus and mountains. The chase is grueling. Soldiers through snow. Rivers freeze around their boots. Icy winds lash their faces. It is no longer the blazing heat of Issus or the dust of Ty, but the biting cold of highlands. Yet Alexander pushes them onward. His eyes fixed not on comfort but on destiny. In 330 BCE, near Epatana, news reaches him. Darius has been betrayed. Satraps once loyal turn against their king. Bessus, a Persian noble, seizes Darius, intending to claim power himself. When Alexander's forces close in, Bessus' men stab their king and leave him dying in a wagon. Macedonian scouts find the body. Darius, abandoned, breathes his last before Alexander can reach him. Mainstream historical fact: Darius III was murdered by his own nobles during his flight, leaving Alexander master of the Persian Empire. The scene is heavy with irony. Alexander, who longed to defeat Darius in personal combat, instead finds a dying man betrayed and broken. Accounts say he covered the body with his cloak, sending it for a royal burial in Pipilis. Perhaps it was genuine respect for a fellow king. Perhaps it was theatre. Quirky tidbit: some sources claim Alexander even wept over Darius, declaring that he would have treated him honorably had he been captured alive. Whether tears fell or not, the symbolism mattered. Alexander was not just conqueror, he was heir, the rightful king of Asia. Historians still argue whether Alexander's grief was sincere or staged. Some believe he admired Darius, seeing him as tragic rival rather than enemy. Others suggest he used the moment to present himself as noble successor. Whatever the truth, Darius's death left a vacuum, and Alexander stepped in with both feet. He adopted Persian titles, sat in Persian courts, married Persian women, and demanded loyalty from satraps. He was no longer foreign invader. He was the empire's new master. Yet, as always, his gaze drifted east. Beyond Persia lay lands unknown. The mighty Hindu Kush, the Indus River, elephants larger than houses, kingdoms said to glisten with gold, and Alexander, restless as ever, wanted them all. In 327 BCE, after years consolidating Persia, Alexander begins the march toward India. The journey is brutal. His army, now a mix of Macedonian veterans and Persian levies, trudges across the Hindu Kush mountains. Picture it: narrow passes choked with snow, winds that cut through cloaks, soldiers slipping on icy paths, mules collapsing under loads. Men curse, stumble, freeze. But Alexander is there among them, enduring the same hardships. He refuses comfort, eating what they eat, marching at their pace. This, more than speeches, binds men to him. If their king suffers, they can too. At one pass, so high the sky seems to press down, soldiers carve steps into ice to haul siege engines across. Think about that, dragging massive wooden machines meant for warm plains over frozen peaks where even goats struggle. It's absurd. Almost comical siege towers inching upward, while men slip and swear. And yet somehow they succeed. Alexander's will bend mountains themselves. When they descend into Bactria and then into the Punjab, the world changes. The air grows warmer, the land greener. Rivers snake across fertile plains. Strange trees dot the horizon. And animals the Macedonians have never seen wander the fields. The soldiers gape at parrots flashing bright feathers, monkeys swinging through branches, spices filling the air. Men from Macedon's dry hills, it feels like stepping into another planet. And then the elephants, towering, armored, trumpeting beasts that seem more monster than animal to the Macedonians, who had never faced such creatures in battle. They are terrifying. Imagine a veteran who fought at Chyrania, Issus, Galgum, who has faced Persian cavalry, stead chariots, endless infantry suddenly staring at a living wall of grey muscle, tusks capped in bronze. You can almost hear him mutter, "Nope, that's not in the training manual." A mainstream historical fact: Alexander's campaign in India introduced his army to war elephants, weapons that shocked and terrified Greek soldiers. Quirky tidbit: supposedly, some Macedonians joked nervously that they would need ladders to spear the beasts or else convince them to join the companion cavalry. Humor is a soldier's defense against fear. Historians still debate how much Alexander truly intended to conquer India versus simply testing its edges. Some argue he wanted the whole subcontinent. Others believe he merely sought to secure his empire's eastern flank. But one thing is certain: he could not resist the allure of pushing further. The most famous clash comes at the Hydaspes River in 326 BCE against King Porus. The river is swollen, rushing with monsoon rains. Its banks, guarded by Porus's army complete with elephants. Crossing seems impossible. Yet Alexander, master of deception, tricks Porus. He leaves part of his army in camp to distract while secretly Finn troops upstream under cover of night and storm. Imagine the darkness, rain lashing, men clinging to rafts, horses swimming beside them, all praying the current doesn't sweep them away. At dawn, Porus sees Alexander already across. Battle erupts. Macedonian phalanx against elephants. Companion cavalry circling, arrows raining. The elephants charge, tusks gleaming, trampling men, tossing them like rag dolls. Horses panic at the smell. Soldiers scatter. For the first time, the Macedonians face genuine terror. But Alexander rallies them, shouting, leading charges, spears aimed at elephant handlers. Slowly, the beasts are wounded, maddened, turning even on their own. The tide shifts. Porus towering over his men, so tall he supposedly needed 2 horses to ride fights bravely until wounded and captured. Alexander, impressed by his valor, does something unexpected. He not only spares Porus but restores him as ruler, granting him even more territory. When asked how he wished to be treated, Porus answered simply like a king. Alexander, delighted, declared it exactly how he would treat him. Mercy, theater, pragmatism all rolled into one. Mainstream historical fact. After Hypaspes, Alexander made Porus a loyal ally, recognizing the value of ruling through local kings. Quirky tidbit. Some soldiers whispered that Alexander spared Porus because he was so tall and imposing. He looked like a hero from Homer, and Alexander couldn't resist having one on his side. Historians still argue whether the Hypaspes was Alexander's hardest battle. Some call it his finest tactical display. Others note that elephants nearly broke his army. What's clear is that the victory cemented his reputation, even in India, yet the cost is high. Thousands die, Macedonians exhausted. The monsoon rains, drench camps, food spoils, disease spreads. Soldiers grumble, long for home. They've marched from Greece to India, across deserts and mountains, fought city after city. Their king, insatiable, speaks of crossing further east toward the Ganges, where new kingdoms wait, but the men finally resist. At the Hyphosus River, when Alexander urges them forward, they refuse. A mutiny, silent but firm. Tears in his eyes, Alexander pleads, reminds them of glory, of Achilles, of destiny. But the veterans shake their heads. Enough is enough. For perhaps the first time, Alexander bows not to enemy, but to his own men. He agrees to turn back. In anger and sorrow, he retreats to his tent, refusing to eat. For days, sulking like a child denied candy. Yet even sulking, he remains Alexander. He orders massive altars built on the riverbank, monuments proclaiming he reached the edge of the world. If he cannot go further, he will at least leave a mark. The march into India reveals not only his brilliance, but his limits. He has conquered Persia, humbled Darius, faced elephants, crossed monsoons, but he cannot conquer exhaustion. Even Achilles, after all, needed rest. For Alexander, that truth cuts deeper than any spear. The reluctant army, the roar of the Hypaspes still echoes in their bones. The vision of elephants trampling men still haunts their sleep, and yet the army moves eastward. Alexander's heart pounds with the lure of the unknown. Beyond the Hyphosus River, called the Bees by locals, he imagines even greater kingdoms, rivers broader than seas, cities shining with gold. His soldiers, however, feel only the weight of mud caked on sandals, the ache of wounds that never healed. The weariness of 10 years spent marching behind one insatiable man. Here is the irony. The same king who once coaxed men into charging through arrow storms with speeches about glory now finds himself facing silence. At the Hyphosus, Alexander summons his army. Rain falls heavy and endless. The river swells in the distance, its current fierce. Alexander stands before his veterans, men who fought beside him at Granicus, Issus, Galgum, Tai, Bucephalus, Hypaspes. They are scarred, hardened, loyal beyond reason. Yet when he urges them to march into the unknown, not a cheer rises. Instead, the silence thickens. Mainstream historical fact. In 326 BCE, Alexander's army mutinied at the Hyphosus River, refusing to march further into India. He tries persuasion. He reminds them of Troy, of Achilles, of how their deeds will echo in eternity. He points eastward, promising riches, promising stories that will shame any who stay behind. But the men shift uneasily. Some stare at the ground, some cough, some cross arms over chests. Finally, a few voices speak. What all think, we have gone far enough. Ikoineus, one of Alexander's trusted commanders, speaks for the army. He says the men are exhausted, longing for families, for home, for a life beyond endless battles. They have reached the world's edge, as far as their courage is concerned. Alexander listens, jaw tight. Historians still argue whether his tears were genuine grief or calculated theater, but accounts agree. He stormed back to his tent, refusing to eat or speak, sulking for days. Quirky tidbit. Some soldiers joked darkly that their king was behaving like Achilles in his tent, pouting after an insult. The comparison would not have been lost on Alexander, who fashioned his life after Homer's hero. And just like Achilles, Alexander eventually emerged not to forgive, but to compromise. The decision weighs heavily. He orders massive altars built at the Hyphosis, towering monuments that declare in stone that Alexander came this far, the edge of the known world. If he cannot march further, then let future generations know it was his choice to stop, not his army's rebellion. Pride preserved, sort of. Turning back, however, is no mercy. Alexander does not choose the easy road home. No gentle retreat along familiar paths, no retracing of steps. Instead, he plans a grand arc southward along rivers, through hostile territories, across deserts. Some suspect he wishes to punish his army by showing them that even retreat will be conquest. Others argue he simply cannot resist new horizons, even if they lead backwards. Historians still argue whether his chosen route was strategic brilliance or reckless cruelty. The march south begins with battles. Tribes resist. Fortresses rise from jungles and plains. Alexander hurls himself at them with the same ferocity as ever. At one city, Multan, he personally leads an assault, scaling ladders under a hail of arrows. Soldiers below hesitate, but Alexander climbs alone, leaping onto the walls, striking defenders with sword and shield. It is reckless, mad, yet utterly in character. Then comes disaster. As he leads the charge inside, an arrow pierces his chest, puncturing a lung. Blood gushes, air hisses, the king collapses. Panic spreads. Alexander, invincible, struck down. His men fight desperately, hauling him away, desperate to save him. For days, he hovers between life and death. Mainstream historical fact. Alexander was gravely wounded at Multan in 326 BCE, nearly dying from a chest wound. Quirky tidbit. Some accounts claim his soldiers, fearing rumors of his death, paraded him on a ship with his chest bandaged, just to prove he lived. Imagine it. Alexander pale as parchment, coughing blood, waving weakly to reassure thousands of anxious eyes. A grim but almost comedic puppet show of vitality. Historians still argue about how close to death he came. Some suggest it was miraculous recovery. Others say later writers exaggerated the wound for drama. Either way, the scar remained, a reminder that even gods can bleed. When he recovers barely, Alexander does not slow. He leads the army further down the Indus, storming more cities, demanding submission. His obsession seems feverish now, as if the arrow in his chest spurred him to burn brighter before he burned out. His soldiers obey, but murmurs grow. They are tired of jungles, rains, endless resistance. The monsoon lashes their camps. Supplies rotate. Fever spreads. Each day, the army grows thinner, hungrier, more resentful. And then the desert. To return west, Alexander chooses a route across the Gedrosian Desert, modern Macedon, one of the harshest landscapes on Earth. Why? Some say it was punishment for his army's refusal at the Hyphosis. Others argue he sought to rival legendary expeditions, proving he could march where no one else dared. Whatever the reason, the result is misery. Picture it. Endless sand, burning sun, winds that sear skin, dunes that swallow men whole. Water vanishes. Wells are poisoned or dry. Horses collapse. Camels stagger. Men die by the hundreds. They leave bodies half buried in sand, dunes covering them within hours. Supplies run out, so soldiers chew leather straps, gnaw roots, drink brackish water that scalds throats. It is less an army than a procession of ghosts. Mainstream historical fact. Alexander's march through the Gedrosian Desert, 325 BCE, caused massive losses to his army, with thousands dying of thirst and starvation. Quirky tidbit. Supposedly, one day scouts found a tiny pool of water and brought a helmet full to Alexander. He looked at it, then poured it into the sand before the men, declaring he would not drink unless all could. Soldiers wept, not sure if from thirst or loyalty, and trudged on. Historians still argue whether the event actually happened or was polished legend. But like most stories about Alexander, truth and theater blend seamlessly. Through it all, Alexander presses forward, stubborn as ever. His men grumble, yet they follow, bound not by love anymore, but by the momentum of years. Some dream of Macedon, of wives and children left behind. Others mutter curses under their breath, wondering if their king seeks conquest or just his own immortality? The answer, of course, is both. By the time they stagger out of the desert into more fertile lands, the army is half destroyed, ragged, broken. Yet Alexander still burns with ambition. He reorganizes satrapies, founds new cities, plans, fleets. His soldiers can barely stand, but their king is already scheming about Arabia, about Carthage, about Rome, lands they have only heard of in stories. And here lies the paradox of Alexander's life. His army, reluctant, battered, mutinous, still remains with him. They hate him, love him, resent him, worship him. He is a tyrant and a savior, a reckless dreamer and a calculating strategist, a man who nearly killed them all, yet bound them to his name forever. As they limp westward, no one knows it yet, but their greatest set. Hardships are not over. They will see Babylon again, but not the Alexander they remember. His relentless drive is consuming him from within, and the reluctant army will soon become the mourning army. Alexander's return to Babylon. When Alexander finally emerges from the nightmare of the Jedroian desert, the sun feels different. No longer a merciless god hammering his men into dust, but a softer warmth that glitters on irrigated fields, fat cattle and bustling villages. The survivors stagger forward like revenants, gaunt and scarred, their sandals worn to strips, their eyes hollow. And yet there is life again, water again, bread again. Babylon waits, not with sandstorms or poisoned wells, but with grandeur. For years, Babylon has been both prize and playground for Alexander. He first marched into it after crushing Darius at Galgum, greeted not as a destroyer, but as a liberator. Its colossal walls and ziggurats shimmered under torchlight. Then, and they shimmer still, a jewel on the set. Euphrates set. Now, in 324 BCE, CE, the city readies itself once again for its king. Caravans race ahead, announcing his approach. Artisans prepare garlands, priests, Polish altars. To the Babylonians, this is not just a king returning. It is a god returning. The army drags itself behind him, shuffling shadows of what they once were. Even they cannot help but stare when Babylon's gates loom on the horizon. Towers climb skyward, gardens cascade with green, canals glitter like veins of silver. Some whisper that the Hanging Gardens, one of the wonders of the world, still survive somewhere beyond those walls. Whether myth or truth, the city's majesty silences them. After endless deserts, it looks like paradise. Mainstream historical fact. In 324 BCE, CE Alexander returned to Babylon after years of campaigning, choosing it as his new capital. Alexander enters in triumph, though triumph now carries shadows. Trumpets sound, incense clouds rise, thousands throng the streets. The Babylonians chant his name, not as invader, but as king. Alexander rides tall, his armor gleaming. Yet beneath the gold is a man who has survived wounds, fevers, grief, mutiny, and near death. To the crowd, he is unstoppable. To his soldiers, he is unrelenting. To himself, perhaps he is both. There is celebration, of course. Feasts spill through the avenues. Wine flows like rivers. Dancers twirl in silks. But Babylon is not only for celebration. It is for ambition. Alexander is no longer content with a nomad's tent or a battlefield's dust. Here, in the navel of empires, he dreams of a world government. Plans unfurl on wax tablets, new fleets on the Persian Gulf, new roads connecting east to west, new trade routes weaving from India to the Mediterranean. He envisions Babylon as the beating heart of an empire so vast that no border will contain it. Historians still argue whether these plans were genuine or grandiose sketches of a restless mind. Was Alexander about to launch expeditions into Arabia, perhaps even Africa, or were these only fantasies whispered between wine cups? The truth lies buried with him, but the fragments tantalize. The army, meanwhile, tastes both relief and unease. Relief because Babylon offers rest, food, and women. Unease because Alexander's gaze still points outward. After a decade of war, they crave permanence. He craves movement, quirky tidbit. At one of the grand feasts, Alexander supposedly hosted a drinking contest among his soldiers. One man, Cletus of the Sali, drank himself to death within days. Another, a soldier named Promachus, allegedly consumed nearly 4 gallons of unmixed wine in a single sitting, then promptly collapsed and died. Imagine that as your war medal. Not wounds, not scars, but death by bottomless goblet. Alexander himself was known to drink prodigiously, though whether his tolerance matched his ambition is another debate. The city also becomes stage for pageantry. In 324 BCE, Alexander organizes the famous Susa weddings, though Babylon inherits the afterglow of their spectacle. Thousands of his soldiers are married to Persian women, a fusion ceremony meant to blend Macedonian and Persian elites into one family. Alexander himself takes 2 wives of royal Persian blood, including Statira, daughter of Darius. To him, it is unity. To his men, it feels like cultural coercion. They marry because they are told to, not because they wish to. Still, garlands are woven, vows exchanged, and wine consumed. Mainstream historical fact. The Susa marriages of 324 BCE were Alexander's attempt to merge Macedonian and Persian cultures. Though most of these unions dissolved after his death, the army grumbles quietly, mocking Alexander behind closed tents. "First he made us Persians in dress," they mutter, recalling the hated robes and rituals. "Now he makes us Persians in bed. Some keep their brides, others abandon them." Historians still argue whether Alexander genuinely sought cultural unity or whether these marriages were pragmatic attempts to secure loyalty from Persian nobility. Either way, the experiment falters as soon as his charisma can no longer enforce it. But Babylon does not just host weddings, it hosts omens. And omens cling to Alexander's return like shadows. One story claims that as he approached the city, priests begged him not to enter, warning of ill omens, an eclipse, an unfavorable alignment of the stars. Others whispered that the wall's gates had been cursed, and that the king's death would soon follow if he passed through them. Alexander, half believer, half skeptic, detoured into the city by a side entrance, perhaps mocking the prophecy, perhaps hedging his bets. Historians still argue whether this tale is superstition retroactively stitched to his fate, or whether he truly feared Babylon's gods. Inside the city, he throws himself into projects with feverish energy. Shipyards spring up along the Euphrates. Thousands of laborers fashion timbers, sails, and oars. Alexander dreams of a navy to explore the Persian Gulf and beyond. He reorganizes satrapies, punishes corrupt officials, rewards loyal ones. His handwriting streaks across clay tablets as he dictates orders day and night. Yet something else stirs in Babylon. The king is slowing down. Not outwardly, his gestures remain fiery. His voice carries, but within. The wound at molten aches. Fevers seize him at night. He drinks heavily, perhaps to numb pain, perhaps to silence the whisper that mortality is closer than he dares admit. His friends notice, his generals whisper, the aura of invincibility wavers. Mainstream historical fact. Alexander fell ill and died in Babylon in 323 BCE at the age of 32. The cause remains one of history's greatest mysteries, but not yet. In these months, he still plans. Arabia beckons. He sketches fleets, drafts, logistics, imagines roads carved through deserts. His army weary hopes these are only words. Yet they know him. He has never stopped at words. Quirky tidbit, supposedly, when asked, what he intended to do after conquering the world, Alexander replied, "Rest." Some scholars suggest it was a joke, a sardonic wink at his insatiable hunger. Others believe he meant it, and that Babylon was meant as his throne of rest at last. Historians still argue whether Alexander was capable of resting at all. For now, Babylon hums. The streets throng with merchants and mercenaries, astrologers and philosophers. The palace resounds with music and laughter, but also with arguments and schemes. Alexander sits at the center, both spider and fly, weaving dreams larger than any Siki can hold. His army, reluctant but bound, watches, eats, heals, and waits. What they cannot know is how swiftly this stage will darken. The gods of Babylon are not done with Alexander, and neither are the weaknesses of his own body. The fevers that shake him at night are not just passing ailments, they are heralds. The greatest conqueror the world has seen is about to face an enemy no sword can slay. The fall of the Conqueror. The spring air in Babylon is heavy, clinging to the skin like warm silk, perfumed by gardens and river reeds, and yet tinged with something uneasy. The soldiers lounging in shaded courtyards sense it. The courtiers bustling through the palace halls sense it. Even the priests of Marduk, who have watched kings rise and fall for centuries, whisper it. Alexander is restless, and Babylon itself seems to thrum with the uncertainty of what comes next. Only months before, he strode into the city like a triumphant god. Now a fragile shadow tugs at the edges of his aura. His body bears the proof of campaigns without pause, scars that cross his torso like lightning bolts, a shoulder that never healed quite right, a thigh pierced by an arrow, lungs damaged from fevers caught in Indian jungles. He still carries himself like the Alexander of old, straight-backed, bronze-skinned, with eyes that seem to bore into eternity. But those closest to him notice the tremors when he drinks too much, wine, or the way he winces when rising from his throne. Historians still argue whether Alexander's decline was obvious to all, or only to the inner circle. Was he a visibly weakened king masking fragility with grandeur? Or was he still the image of invincibility, undone only by sudden illness? The surviving accounts differ wildly. One constant remains: ambition. Even as his body falters, his mind races. Plans for the conquest of Arabia unfold in wax tablets and clay records. He envisions fleets sailing out from the Persian Gulf, probing the southern coasts, then circling into the Red Sea. Roads will snake through deserts. Cities will spring up like pearls on a necklace. The empire's spine will stretch ever farther. For Alexander, Babylon is no resting place. It is a launch pad. His men, though, groan in silence. Arabia sounds like another endless trial. They have marched through mountains, deserts, and jungles. They have buried brothers in foreign soils. They have carried Alexander's dreams on their backs long past endurance. Now, in the wealth of Babylon, with food, wine, and women of plenty, they want peace. Alexander, as always, wants more. Mainstream historical fact. In the months before his death, in 323 BCE, Alexander was planning a major Arabian campaign with fleets and supplies already under preparation. The palace is a swirl of activity. Architects sketch blueprints for canals. Shipwrights hammer timbers along the Euphrates. Couriers race back and forth, fetching orders to distant satrapies. Amid this storm, Alexander presides like a conductor, barking commands, dreaming aloud, scribbling notes deep into the night. He cannot stop. Perhaps he will not stop. But Babylon is not merely a city of marble and plans. It is a city of omens, and omens once again stalk Alexander. A month before his death, it is said a lion escaped from the royal hunting park, terrorizing the streets before being killed. Another tale claims that Babylonian priests warned Alexander that, entering the city at all would bring his doom. He allegedly listened, detoured, and entered through a different gate, as if fate could be fooled by a side door. Historians still argue whether these omens were recorded after his death to make the story neater, or whether they truly spooked him. Quirky tidbit: an ancient Babylonian diary, essentially a clay tablet with astronomical notes, mentions a lunar eclipse around this time, interpreted as an ill sign for the king. Imagine having your destiny sealed, not by armies or politics, but by a shadow crossing the moon. Alexander, who had once laughed at Persian magi and their rituals, reportedly took such portents more seriously in his final days. Perhaps victories had made him bold, scars had made him cautious. Meanwhile, within the palace walls, another storm bruised, not of omens, but of politics. Alexander's marshals whisper in corners, their voices hushed, but urgent. They know he is mortal, no matter how divine his propaganda. They, wonder what will happen if, when he dies. His son by Roxana is not yet born. His half-brother Ortus lives but suffers from cognitive impairments. Who will rule? Historians still argue whether conspiracies truly swirled around Alexander's death. Was he poisoned by jealous generals or felled by disease? The sources contradict one another, and suspicions have lingered for over 2 millennia. The actual decline begins quietly. At first, Alexander suffers from fever after a banquet. The heat presses in, wine weighs heavy, and the nights are restless. He shakes it off as he has shaken off countless illnesses before. His men expect him to rise the next day, shouting commands as usual, and he does for a time, but the fever returns. He grows weaker, struggles to speak, struggles to move. Mainstream historical fact. Ancient sources like Arrian and Plutarch record that Alexander fell ill after heavy drinking, lingered in a fever for several days, and gradually lost the ability to speak before, dying in Babylon at age 32. The palace becomes a hushed labyrinth. Physicians bustle in with puces and prayers. Priests mutter incantations over sacrificial fires. Friends crowd his bedside, men like Tommy, Seleucus, Perdiccas, each aware that they are watching history shift beneath their feet. One story, chilling and often retold, says that as Alexander lay speechless, His soldiers were allowed to file past his bed. One by one, thousands of men entered the chamber, tears streaming, saluting their silent king. Some accounts say he raised his hand weakly to each, acknowledging them even as breath rattled in his chest. Historians still argue whether this farewell march truly happened or whether it was a later invention to dramatize the end of an era. Quirky tidbit: Alexander supposedly continued planning campaigns from his sickbed. Even as his fever consumed him, he was dictating orders about fleets and roads. Some claim he handed his signet ring to Perdiccas, a trusted general effectively set, designating him regent. Others claim he gave no such order. His empire built on iron will cracked the moment that will flickered. The debates over his final illness remain fierce even now. Was it malaria from the marshes of Babylon, typhoid fever from contaminated water, or poison slipped into his cup by rivals? Modern scholars lean toward natural disease. Poisons of that era would not have produced such a long, drawn-out decline. But suspicion lingers because suspicion always does when great men fall young. As his voice falters, his empire unravels. Generals measure each other with calculating eyes. The courtiers hover like vultures. Alexander, once the embodiment of momentum, lies still, mainstream historical fact. On the 10th of June, 323 BCE, CE, Alexander the Great died in Babylon, aged 32. In the final hours, his companions beg him to name a successor. The silence stretches, broken only by coughing, fever, and strained whispers. One tradition claims he mutters to the strongest, leaving his empire to be claimed by whoever could seize it. Another claims he named Perdiccas outright. Still others insist he said nothing at all, merely drifting into death without final words. Historians still argue whether his last phrase was prophecy, command, or myth. Babylon mourns. The city that greeted him with incense and fanfare now drowns in grief and dread. Soldiers howl in the streets. Women tear their garments. Priests beat their chests. The world has lost a king. But more than a king, it has lost an idea. The idea that one man could unite East and West under a single crown. Quirky tidbit: some ancient writers noted that Alexander's body did not show signs of decay for several days after his death, leading many to believe he was not dead at all but sleeping, or that he was truly divine. Whether this was natural embalming, exaggeration, or sheer myth, it fed centuries of speculation that Alexander could not die like ordinary men. And so in a palace thick with incense, sweat, and whispers, Alexander the Great, the boy who tamed Bucephalus, the man who toppled Darius, the dreamer who reached the Indus, succumbs. He is 32 years old. He has lived more lives in a decade than most dynasties live in centuries, and yet he dies unfinished. With ships still half-built, campaigns unlaunched, roads untraveled, the conqueror who never lost a battle loses at last to the one enemy all men share, legacy and division of an empire. When Alexander breathes his last in Babylon, the silence that follows is almost unnatural. A man who once made the world shake with his footsteps leaves behind only the far, quiet murmur of attendants and the bitter sobbing of soldiers in shadowed corridors. He is 32, younger than many of his own generals, younger than some of his veteran sons. His eyes close, and the empire he forged in fire, sand, and blood immediately begins to unravel. For a moment, though, there is denial. The Macedonians, fiercely loyal and impossibly stubborn, refuse to believe their king has died. Some insist his body does not decay. Proof, they argue, that he was truly divine. Others whisper, he is only sleeping, that he will rise again like some Eastern god of renewal. In the palace, his officers pace and argue, what now? Who leads? Who can possibly follow Alexander? The answer, of course, is no one. Mainstream historical fact: Alexander died in the 3rd of June 23 BCE in Babylon, sparking a succession crisis that tore his empire apart. On his deathbed or so later, chroniclers claim Alexander was asked to whom he left his empire, his answer to the strongest, a phrase both poetic and catastrophic. Historians still argue whether he truly said these words or whether they were invented later. A neat ribbon to tie around the chaos that followed. But, whether or not he spoke them, his empire immediately fractures under their weight. His generals, the famed Diadochi, circle like wolves. Ptolemy, Seleucus, Antigonus, Lysimachus, Cassander, names that will soon carve kingdoms out of Alexander's corpse. Each man believes he deserves a piece, not because Alexander willed it, but because he left no clear heir. There is an heir. Technically, Roxana, Alexander's Bactrian wife, is pregnant. Soon she gives birth to a boy, Alexander IV. Another possible heir exists, Heracles, the illegitimate son of Alexander, by Barcine. But neither infant nor illegitimate son can command hardened veterans. And so the Diocles manipulate, murder, and maneuver. Quirky tidbit. Supposedly, Roxana, fierce and pragmatic, had Statera, another of Alexander's wives, murdered after his death, along with her sister, Dretes, poisoned, strangled, quietly erased. A queen removing rivals in a world where mercy is weakness. Historians still argue whether this story is factual or propaganda spread by later enemies, but it lingers as an eerie footnote to Alexander's passing. The funeral becomes its own battlefield. His body, embalmed in honey to preserve it, was meant to be set. Returned to Macedonia, to rest beside his ancestors, but Tommy, clever and ruthless, intercepts the funeral cortege. He diverts it to Egypt, where he builds an opulent tomb in Alexandria. For centuries, pilgrims and emperors will visit Alexander's resting place, bowing before the conqueror who lies in eternal foreign soil. Julius Caesar himself, centuries later, will gaze upon his mummified body. And yet, somewhere in the folds of time, the tomb vanishes. Historians still argue where Alexander's remains rest today, beneath Alexandria's streets, drowned in the harbor, or destroyed altogether. A mystery worthy of a king who lived like myth. Mainstream historical fact. Alexander's body was stolen by Tommy and entombed in Egypt, where it was venerated until late antiquity. Its final fate remains unknown. The empire he leaves behind fractures visibly. In the wars of the Diadochi, old comrades become bitter enemies. Battles rage from Asia Minor to India, from Egypt to Macedonia. The dream of unity crumbles. Seleucus carves out the Seleucid Empire in Persia and Mesopotamia. Ruling lands once under Darius, Tommy cements himself in Egypt, founding a dynasty that will culminate with Cleopatra centuries later. Antigonus and his son Demetrius struggle for dominance in Greece and Asia Minor, while Cassandra claws power in Macedonia itself. Alexander's son, Alexander IV, is eventually murdered, snuffing out the Argead dynasty in a swirl of betrayal. The soldiers, once bound by the thunder of Alexander's voice, now march under fractured banners. Some veterans return home, scarred and weary, carrying stories of India's elephants and Babylon's feasts. Others die in wars that no longer seem glorious, only necessary. The great engine of conquest sputters into dozens of smaller machines. Yet, even as the empire fractures politically, culturally, it expands. Greek language and customs flow eastward like a flood. Cities founded by Alexandria, in Egypt, in Ariasia, in Margana, in Set. Dozens of places most Macedonians had never heard of become hubs of trade and scholarship. Greek art fuses with Persian motifs, Indian sculpture, Egyptian architecture. The world becomes Hellenistic, a blend rather than a conquest. Mainstream historical fact. The Hellenistic era, 32,331 BCE, saw Greek culture spread across Asia and Africa, fusing with local traditions. Quirky tidbit. One of Alexandrias was reportedly founded in modern-day Tajikistan at a spot so remote that locals joked the city had more syllables in its name than inhabitants. Not every Alexandria became a global capital. Some were little more than fortified garrisons. Still, the idea that a man could leave dozens of cities bearing his name like a conqueror's calling card across continents remains staggering. In time, Alexander becomes more than memory. He becomes myth. In Egypt, he is worshipped as son of Amun, a pharaoh whose blood mingles with gods. In the East, Persian and later Islamic traditions weave. Tales of Iskander, or Dul-Qarnayn, the two-horned one, a hero who traveled to the ends of the earth. Medieval romances will paint him as a knightly adventurer, diving beneath the sea in a glass capsule, flying into the skies with a chariot of griffins. Alexander the Conqueror, Alexander the Explorer, Alexander the Immortal. Historians still argue whether Alexander should be remembered as visionary or tyrant. Was he a genius who sought to fuse cultures, or a megalomaniac who dragged men to their deaths, chasing impossible horizons? Was he a liberator who toppled Persia's tyranny, or simply another tyrant in new clothes? The debates never end because his story resists easy answers. But here is what lingers. He changed the map forever. The borders he drew, the cities he founded, the legends he left, they ripple forward. His generals' kingdoms eventually fall, but Rome rises in their shadow. The Middle East becomes a crossroads of cultures, languages, and faiths. Greek texts preserved in Set. Alexandria's libraries will fuel scholars in medieval Baghdad, then later re-enter Europe to ignite the Renaissance. In ways he never dreamed, Alexander becomes a bridge across centuries. Quirky tidbit. In the city of Kandahar, Afghanistan, archaeologists discovered coins and inscriptions linking back to Alexander's conquest. Locals still tell folk tales of Iskandar, whose army passed through long ago, as if the conqueror had only camped outside the city last summer. Myth bleeds into memory, memory into myth. For the men who followed him, though, the legacy is simpler: exhaustion, grief, and awe. They remember the endless marches, the deserts that swallowed friends whole, the battles that shattered armies. They remember his laughter in the tent, his rage when challenged, his terrifying charisma. They remember a man who could share a cup with them one night and order their execution the next. They remember that, for better or worse, they lived in the shadow of Alexander when modern set. Historians sift through fragments, clay tablets, half-ruined cities, biased chronicles. They do more than reconstruct facts. They wrestle with the same contradiction his soldiers felt. Was Alexander hero or villain? Or was he simply human, incandescent for a moment, leaving the world scorched in his wake? And yet, as the centuries stretch, the answer matters less than the story. Alexander's empire dies, but the tale lives. That perhaps is the true conquest. Not land, not gold, not glory, but memory. A memory that outlives walls, crowns, and dynasties. And now, with the last echoes of Alexander's life fading into the distance, let the story soften. Imagine the clamor of swords and the march of armies drifting into silence, replaced by the low hum of cicadas in a warm summer night. The dust of battle settles, and the cities he founded grow quiet, their stones cooled by evening air. Take a breath. The conqueror who raced across continents now rests, and so can you. His dreams of unity, his storms of ambition, his unrelenting drive, they are all folded away like old maps rolled tight on a forgotten shelf. What lingers for us is not the weight of his empire, but the gentler notion that even the greatest flame eventually dims, and that there is calm in that dimming. Picture the Euphrates at twilight, its waters gliding slow and silver, carrying no armies now, only moonlight. The palace halls of Babylon empty, shadows stretching, the laughter and quarrels gone. The world is still, as though even history itself takes a moment to breathe. Let your own thoughts quiet to match it. The restless energy of conquest and ambition has no place here, not tonight. You've journeyed through deserts, through storms, through victories and losses, and now the path comes to rest. So let your shoulders loosen, let your eyes grow heavy. Whatever battles filled your day, let them scatter like sand in the wind. The world outside can wait. For now, the story has ended, and the quiet belongs to you.